closing the gaps with SMART goals. Get out your lab notebook, sit comfortably, and take a few deep, relaxing breaths. For today's experiment, we'll start closing those gaps that you identified during our previous Mind the Gaps experiment. These are those gaps between your core values and how you're typically living your life. We'll talk about some key differences between values and goals, and then we'll introduce a really useful method to help you create clear, realistic, meaningful goals as you continue this journey of living a more honest and open, authentic, values based life. So, to begin, take a few moments to flip back to what you wrote out during your Mind the Gaps experiment. Again, assuming you wrote your insights and observations down. And just take a few minutes to review your core values and the gaps that you identified. As we've talked about during our previous experiments, every value you've identified as being important to you refers to qualities and attributes and principles in life that you've personally chosen because you've determined that these are deeply meaningful for you and the life you want to live. So, now here's a really interesting question to consider. As you look over your list of core values, is there any value that can be completed? Any core value that you can put on a list and then check off that list once you're completely finished with it. So, as I look over my list from the Mind the Gaps experiment, my eye went to my number 2 core value of being loving, which we can define as giving love to others. So, can I ever finish this core value of being loving? Is there ever going to be an endpoint where I can check that off and then move on to the next core value? So, as you look over your list, if you're noticing a struggle to identify a point where you can check a value off a list, that indicates to me that you've identified an actual value rather than a goal. So, here are some really important points. Goals can be put on a list and then checked off from that list. Values cannot. Values are like a compass. They provide a sense of direction to guide our decisions and our actions on this ever evolving journey that we call life. So you can never be finished heading north, right? You just keep heading in that direction for as long as you decide that's the direction you want to go. You might bump into obstacles while heading north, a large boulder, a mountain, a river. But then the challenge is, how do you go around or over or under or through those obstacles? So, where values are like a compass on our journey through life, goals are like the specific destinations that we're aiming to reach along the way, the landmarks or the milestones on our journey. And importantly, these destinations can be more or less aligned with the direction we're wanting to go. So we can say that another way, our goals can be more or less aligned with our chosen values. So, taking my value or compass direction of being loving as an example here, we can say that for me, being loving is similar to heading north. So, let's think of a few destinations or a few goals that we can put on a list and then check off that list that would be consistent with me heading north towards my value of being loving. So when I think about this, maybe engaging in an act of kindness, that came up for me as a goal, or again, a destination on the journey that's consistent with my value of showing love to others, heading north here on my compass. So on the other hand, a goal that might involve me acting selfishly or in a self-centered way, maybe something that might hurt other people, those would likely represent destinations or landmarks that are heading in the complete opposite direction to my value of being loving. We could say these behaviors would be likely to move me south if I'm wanting to head north. So, to sum up a bit, values are like a compass that provides a sense of direction and meaning that are enduring and they can't be checked off of a list. While goals are these specific destinations or outcomes that are specific and they can be checked off a list. And we can intentionally align our goals with our values, therefore resulting in a more meaningful, fulfilling, and authentic values based life. And by the way, you might have noticed that the experiments we've completed so far on being remembered, discovering your values, building your core values hierarchy, and minding the gaps, these have all been about discovering and fine tuning your compass, getting really clear on the direction you want to go on this journey that we call life. And today, you're going to start the process of getting very specific about the destinations you consider to be worth the time and the effort for you to visit along the way. So now, looking back over your core values and the gaps you identified during the Mind the Gaps experiment, go ahead and focus on one specific gap you determine currently exists between one of your core values and how you're currently living by that value in your daily life. You might continue with the gap you chose to focus on during our previous Judge E and Judge F experiment, or you can select a new gap if you'd like, and just pausing the audio if you need some more time before we continue. Okay, now that you have that specific gap, go ahead and rewrite the specific core value and possibly its brief description, the percentage of a gap you determine currently exists, and any observations or insights you may have written down about patterns of your own behavior that might be contributing to that gap on a new page in your lab notebook for this current Closing the Gaps experiment. Pausing the audio until you've finished. So, your core value is your compass direction. The gap you determine currently exists. That represents the distance between your compass direction and the direction your specific behaviors are tending to take you each day. And now take a few moments to think about what specific goals would absolutely be aligned with this core value. These are specific behaviors you could put on a list and check off from that list. Specific destinations aligned with your compass direction. That would start closing this particular gap right away. And we'll be using these goals you come up with for the remainder of the experiment. So really give yourself permission to take your time here and to write down every goal that comes to mind. Pausing the audio now until you're finished. So for me, I continued with the example I mentioned a little bit ago with my number 2 core value of being loving and the 30% gap I previously determined existed when I went through the Mind the Gaps experiment. And when I did this current experiment that we're running, here are 4 goals or, destinations aligned with this core value of being loving that came to my mind and that I wrote down. Number 1, help others. 2, focus on their needs. 3, be more selfless. 4, give my children the gift of my time. So, as I look over what I wrote out, I notice that all 4 of these goals are pretty vague. So, what would it be like specifically to be more selfless in my life? And how exactly would I give my children the gift of more of my time? How often am I going to do this? And can I actually pull this off? Or is this just setting me up for more evaluative judgments from Judge E and those related emotions like sadness or frustration, guilt, or shame? So here's where we're going to bring in the incredibly useful method to help us create really clear and realistic and meaningful values based goals as we continue this journey of living more meaningful and authentic lives. And what's this method, you ask? Well, it's really clever. And by clever, I mean smart. And by smart, I'm referring to the acronym that originates from the fields of management and organizational theory that stands for specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time bound. That's BOUND, time bound. So take a few moments to select only one of those values based goals that you wrote out just a moment ago. And ideally, this will be a goal that feels really meaningful to you in terms of closing your particular gap. And once you have that goal, let's make sure that we work together to turn that into a SMART goal. So pause the audio until you finish selecting that one goal before we move on. Okay, so now that you have it, go ahead and rewrite this goal in your lab notebook. For me, I chose the goal of give my children the gift of my time. So now we'll take our goal and we're going to run it through that SMART method. So, first in your lab notebook, go ahead and write down the word specific, which is the S in SMART goal. Rather than a vague and unclear goal, like my original goal of spending more time with my children, setting a more specific, clearly defined, and focused goal will make it much easier on ourselves by providing a clear path and a clear direction for what we want to accomplish. And this often increases our motivation and also the chances we'll actually be successful in accomplishing our values based goals. So, a specific goal will provide an answer to the question, what exactly do I want to accomplish? So, in the past, we all might have created vague goals for ourselves, like wanting to lose weight or get in shape. But as we might be able to see, this can be really difficult, if not impossible, to check off of a list, as we don't exactly know how much weight we want to lose or what getting in shape specifically means for us. So, how can we ever be sure that we've achieved our goal? But on the other hand, a specific goal might be something like I want to lose 15 pounds in 3 months by going to the gym at least 3 times per week and not eating any food past 8 o'clock p.m. every night. So that can be checked off a list. So, coming back to my example, some specific goals for spending more time with my children might be to read at least 10 pages of a book to each of my children every night at bedtime. Another example might be to commit to spending at least 10 minutes of one on one time with each of my children at least 3 times per week, doing whatever my children want to do during those 10 minutes and leaving my cell phone and any other distractions in another room. And by the way, this last one of the alone time without distraction, that's the specific goal I chose to work on in my daily life. Okay, now it's your turn. So take the values based goal you wrote out and make sure that it's specific, that it's clearly defined, focused, and clearly answers the question, what exactly do I want to accomplish? And once you've settled on your specific goal, write that down in your lab notebook next to the word specific. Pausing the audio until you're finished. Okay, so now let's take that specific goal and let's make sure that it's also measurable, which is the M in SMART goal. So go ahead and write the word measurable in your lab notebook. A measurable goal is a goal that can be quantified or tracked in some way. So while a specific goal answers the question, what exactly do I want to accomplish? A measurable goal answers the question, how will I know when I've accomplished my goal? Now, by making sure our values based goal is measurable, this allows us to track our progress and to make adjustments to our goal if we need to. And it also creates a sense of accountability for ourselves and maybe also for others, and can increase our motivation even further as we see our efforts pay off day after day. So, coming back to my example, my specific goal of spending at least 10 minutes of one on one time with each of our four children at least 3 times per week, would I be able to quantify and track that goal? Yes, I would. So, if I'm only spending 5 minutes with each kiddo 1 time a week, I'm clearly falling short of my minimum of 10 minutes at least 3 times per week goal. So, being able to measure it, I can then see what might be getting in the way of me accomplishing my goal. And then I can make adjustments as needed and then continue monitoring my progress over time. All right, once again, your turn. So, take the specific values based goal you wrote out and make sure that it's also measurable, that it can be quantified or tracked in some way. And if it isn't measurable, go ahead and modify your goal so that it is measurable. And then next to the word measurable, write down which specific aspects of your goal can be measured. So in my example, that's the at least 10 minutes, at least 3 times per week. So again, feel free to pause the audio until you're finished here. All right. So now let's take that specific and measurable goal of yours and let's make sure that it's also achievable, which is the A in SMART goal. And go ahead and write down the word achievable in your lab notebook. An achievable goal is a goal that's realistic and that you can achieve given your time and your resources, and also considering all of the current constraints that you have in your life. Now, an achievable goal answers the question, is this goal realistic and achievable given my current resources and constraints? Now, achievable goals are going to ideally hit a sweet spot between something that's challenging for us, but not so challenging that we become frustrated and lose motivation and just, give up because it just seems out of our reach. And when I consider the typical limitations on my time each day, spending at least 10 minutes with each of our four kiddos at least 3 times per week, that does seem achievable. But could I devote 30 minutes to each kid at least 5 days per week? That might be setting the bar a little bit too high. That can set me up for failure, those evaluative judgments from Judge E, and likely wouldn't be very useful. So take your specific and measurable goal and make sure that it's also achievable, that it's realistic and attainable given your current resources and constraints. And if it isn't achievable, rewrite that goal next to the word achievable so that it is. And pause the audio at this time until you're finished. So let's take your specific, measurable, and achievable goal, and now let's make sure it's also relevant, the R in SMART goal. So go ahead and write the word relevant in your lab notebook. A relevant goal is a goal that's meaningful for you and the life you truly want to live. So a relevant goal answers the question, how does this goal align with my values? Relevant goals make sure that the destination on your journey is actually important to you and the life you want to live. So, as you can probably imagine, If a goal's specific and measurable and achievable, but it's not meaningful or important or values based, it can be really hard to have the interest or the motivation to continue working on that goal. But lucky for us, we now know a thing or two about our core values. So we can think about, pretty directly how our current goal aligns with our values. So when I go through this exercise and flip back to my core values hierarchy, I actually see that this current goal of spending more time with my children not only starts to close the 30% gap for my number two core value of being loving, but it also starts to close the 30% gap for my number one core value of family, the 40% gap for my number eight core value of being playful and having fun, and the 40% gap for my number nine core value of happiness for myself and others. So in this case, I can really confidently say that my current goal is relevant as it's really well aligned with my core values. So take your specific, measurable, and achievable goal and go ahead and make sure it's also relevant by actually writing out which core value or, maybe values this goal is aligned with. And you can do that next to the word relevant. And this will give you a really clear picture of the gap or the gaps you'll be closing as you continue to make progress on this goal. So pause the audio at this time until you're finished. So let's take your specific, measurable, achievable, and relevant goal, and let's make sure it's also time bound, the T in SMART goal. So go ahead and write time bound in your lab notebook. A time bound goal is a goal that has a specific deadline for completing it. A time bound goal answers the question, when will I achieve this goal? Making sure that a goal is time bound, this sets a deadline for accomplishing our goal. Now, if you've ever come up against a deadline, like at school or at work, you might be really familiar with just how motivating a deadline can be. So without a specific deadline, we can really easily avoid working on our goal, avoiding with distraction, procrastination, and many other forms of avoidance. And so making sure a goal is time bound, that can also help with the measurable aspect of a SMART goal, as we can then adjust our behavior to make sure we're on track to achieve our goal in the specific time frame that we outlined for ourselves. So when I look at my specific, measurable, achievable, and relevant goal of spending at least 10 minutes of one-on-one time with each of our four children at least 3 times per week, doing whatever my children want during that 10 minutes and leaving my cell phone and other distractions in another room. So I can actually see that this goal does not have a deadline. So this is not time bound. So I'm going to modify my goal to include a deadline. So I'm going to say that I'm going to commit to this goal for 4 weeks. I'm going to run a 1-month experiment here. And over those 4 weeks, as I'm measuring my progress, I might find that I have some more time, or, I want to make some more time to spend with my children in this way. So maybe I'll experiment with increasing my time from 10 minutes to 15 minutes, and I'll see how that goes. And so that would be testing the achievable aspect of the SMART goal in a, kind of a flexible, open, curious manner. And so by modifying my goal to have a deadline of 4 weeks, my goal is now time bound. So I can stay motivated, monitor my progress over time, and then adjust my behavior and my effort as needed to make sure that I'm on track. So once again, your turn here. Take your specific, measurable, achievable, and relevant goal and make sure that it's also time bound. And if it isn't time bound, go ahead and modify it and rewrite your goal so that it is. Pausing the audio here until you're finished. So make sure you write out this final SMART goal in your lab notebook so you can refer back to it later if you need to make any modifications as you move forward. And so the final step here is to actually take action on the SMART goal, to start running this experiment in your daily life. And one method that can help you start this experiment is to break your SMART goal down into the very first step that you need to take. So, for example, this could involve setting a specific day and a specific time that you'll take action. For me, it might be committing to spending 10 minutes of one on one time with my youngest child tomorrow, immediately after we finish dinner. So maybe around 6:30 p.m. And I can also increase my chances of success here by setting a reminder for me to take action. So go ahead and break down your SMART goal into the first step you need to get started, possibly setting yourself up with a reminder on when you'll start, and then writing this down in your lab notebook so you have your final values-based SMART goal to start closing this gap for one of your core values. Again, pausing the audio until you're finished. All right. And as we bring this experiment to an end and you go about the rest of your day, see if you can bring a sense of, openness and curiosity to this entire process of closing the gaps. So if you succeed in starting working on, your values-based SMART goal, what changes do you notice to your experience in each moment? If you run into barriers that prevent you from getting started, see if you can become aware of these barriers and actually write them down in your lab notebook. And notice how often Judge E pops up with those really fun evaluative judgments as these barriers are encountered. Also, notice how you tend to react to these evaluative judgments as they come up, and also how you might work with Judge F to explore the facts about what's actually currently getting in the way and how you might be able to overcome these barriers in the next presenting moment.